who is a strong atheist, the fact that he's pointing this stuff out, I think gives it a lot more credibility, because he's fighting against this attack on Christians, not from the position of being a Christian, but from an objective position outside the fight. He has just about the most objective perspective possible on this issue. Now, I don't know if James Lindsay has specifically stated that the end goal is to make Christianity illegal in America, but I believe that this is implied by what he has written. So let me read here the tweet that he posted the other day. And keep in mind that James Lindsay has done an absolute ton of research on this stuff, and he has actually included citations in the comment section below this tweet as evidence to support his theory. All right, so he posted here on X. He writes, "I have a feeling that this is going to go really badly for me, but it has to be said. The dynamic must be explained. Yesterday, on Good Friday, one of the high holy days of the Christian faith, the Biden administration proclaimed Easter Sunday, March 31st, 2024 specifically, to be a trans day of visibility. The official White House press release page shows an Easter bunny by the White House, indicating they are fully aware that they are making this proclamation specifically about Easter Sunday, even though Easter is not specifically mentioned in the proclamation. This isn't just an insult to the Christian faith, and indeed an intolerable one that proclaims a form of embodied Gnostic theosophy that misleads and destroys kids." I had to look up theosophy, by the way, because I have never heard that term before. And theosophy is actually a very specific kind of cultish thing that existed, I think, like in the early 20th century. But anyway, I digress. It is entirely consistent with woke theosophy, as I've discussed elsewhere and may attach here as a thread, but it is more than that. It is also a deliberate provocation against Christians that must be understood. A key principle of woke activism is your target's reaction is your real action, and that derives from Saul Alinsky in Rules for Radicals and has been codified in the updated activism manual called Beautiful Trouble. And he actually links the manual, the website down below. Beautiful Trouble. What a pretentious lefty type title for something, right? Gross. They do these provocations intentionally, as I have discussed at length in the past, as a means of stoking a reaction that they can use to their advantage. On the reactionary side at present, it must be indicated that there are multiple overlapping active measures to drag faithful Christians into reactionary stances. Active measures is, I believe, the old Soviet Union term for like special ops, special operations, covert operations, psyops, that kind of thing. I think basically any kind of like spy operation that you could imagine from a movie, that would be like active measures. Ways to manipulate and infiltrate another country, this kind of thing.
Active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB.
One is the prevailing Operation Christian Nationalism, which this same administration is framing as one of the most dangerous threats to democracy in the world today. Another is the more local and specific radicalization attempt during Holy Week that follows the Christian rhetoric of Christ is King, which has been successfully tied to an anti-Semitic trope and active measure meant to drive a wedge between Christians and Jews and Christians and Christians. I have taken tremendous heat for exposing this active measure, as have many others, which is a testament to its status as an active measure. Yeah, it's ridiculous that they have made this into something that you're not allowed to say. Of course, Christians are going to say Christ is King. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. There's nothing bigoted about that. It's the same thing as saying the Jews are God's chosen people. Jewish people say that all the time. As well, they should say that. That is a major part of their religion. And a major part of our religion is Christ is King. That is what we believe. There's nothing bigoted about that. This provocation, published yesterday, is overwhelmingly likely aiming to feed into those prevailing active measures, ops, meant to drag Christians into a position of fruitful reaction that the regime can use to clamp down on them. Again, Christian reaction is their real action. And we know for certain that Christian circles are deeply infiltrated with a chest-beating and growing radicalism that is being baited toward association with a growing anti-Semitism. I'm not so sure that that's true, actually. I don't know where he got that information, but look, I've not seen it. I've not seen the data, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I'm not aware of it. And if I could see that data, maybe I would be aware of it then. You know, I should read more of his stuff probably, but I just don't see a lot of guys who are, what do they call them? Chest-beating radicals. And I certainly have not seen a lot of anti-Semitism in the churches. I have never seen anything like that. Maybe in certain parts of the country? I don't know. I just don't think he's right. Maybe he's right, but I don't see it. Your evil government wants this to happen. They are baiting you into it. Basically, at the end of the day, he's concerned that that Christian Americans will react negatively in exactly the way that the Biden administration wants us to, right? Which is probably not going to happen. I mean, I cannot see that happening at all. I think James Lindsay is a little bit misled as to the extent of the anti-Semitic radicalization that has occurred within the Christian church over the past, I don't know how long, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I don't think it's there in the same way that he thinks that it's there. I just have never seen it. If you understood Christians really, you would know that this is probably not going to work, this kind of provocation. However, I do think his broader point is very important to take note of, which is that, what is the Biden administration trying to do here? They are trying to provoke Christians into acting out violently so that they can then accuse Christians of being violent extremists, and then they can clamp down on Christianity, Christians in America. And you might be asking, well, why would the Biden administration want to make Christianity illegal in America? Why would they want to clamp down on Christians? Well, I think, as usual, it has everything to do with power. The majority of conservative Republican voters are Christians. If you are able to make Christianity illegal in America, then you can just arrest anyone who doesn't vote for you. Now, you might be saying, well, we have the freedom of religion in America, so there's no way that they could actually make Christianity illegal. And to those of you who are asking this question, I would say to you, what has this administration done that has led you to believe that they care anything about the Constitution? This is precisely what was done by the Soviets. The Soviet Union realized that if the Russian people's primary allegiance was to God, then the state would never have full control over the populace. If the state ordered citizens to do something that conflicted with their Christian faith, many Russians, they would not obey this. Certainly, the state could imprison these people, they could kill these people, but it was far easier to coerce them into compliance by relinquishing their allegiance to God and shifting that allegiance to the state. The state becomes their religion. The state becomes their God. It's ironic, actually, that leftists constantly insist that the so-called nationalism of conservatives is dangerous when it is the Democrats who want total obedience to the state. All right, now look, we may never actually see an outright law against practicing Christianity. I'm sure that if they could do that, they would eventually implement such a law. However, what I believe that they will do is to create the illusion that Christians are very dangerous in America, and they will develop a story that many kinds of Christians are domestic terrorists. These domestic terrorists may not have taken any actions yet, but the story will go that these terrorist actions are imminent, that the Christians who are planning these terrorist attacks pose an imminent threat. They pose a physical danger to the American populace. And you know what? They have already started creating this illusion. You will remember that recently they went after Catholics, claiming that Catholics were a great terrorist threat.
We do not and will not conduct investigations based on anybody's exercise of their constitutionally protected religion.
You have done so, and your memo explicitly asks for it. Your memo labels traditional Catholics as racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists in need of investigation. You have a list of churches, a list in the memo. You've repeatedly said we don't target churches, we don't list churches. They're listed in the memo. So how many other parishes have you gone to talk to choir directors, for heaven's sake?
As I've
know the answer to that question.
No, I don't know the answer to that question.
And now they're going after Protestants with this new buzzword, Christian nationalist.
Christian nationalism uses Christianity as a means to an end, that end being some form of authoritarianism.
The thing that keeps me up at night is that we lose democracy.
Does that seem possible?
Yes.
It has been Republicans and conservatives over the years who have criticized other countries, like Muslim countries, for imposing religious beliefs and practices. I mean, we have to be consistent, and we can't be hypocritical in saying, these countries shouldn't do this and that, but it's okay for us to do it here because it's the religion that we prefer. Christianity, I mean, Jesus Christ invited people to follow. It was never an imposition, right? Because
this Christian nationalism we find over and over, that if it comes down to democracy or power, they're going to choose power every time.
And for you people out there who think that it is going to end here, you are dreaming.
Yeah.
Because now what they call Christian nationalism, we have seen through history, Reverend Al, people drunk with power and using religion for political power. It always ends badly. It always ends badly. And it's moving in that direction now.
All the explorers had to do, per the Catholic Church's doctrine of discovery, was attempt to convert them to Christianity. And if they resisted in any way, the explorers had the permission of God himself to conquer them, kill them, enslave them for life, and most importantly, to dispossess them of their lands. And history is fascinating, right? Americans should consider making it legal to teach in schools here. When you look at the sometimes violent history of organized religion, or the emergence of right-wing Christianity-based white supremacy here in the U.S., it should not surprise you that the base of support for far-right policies on banning books and distorting history, on abortion, on LGBTQ issues, even support for cults like QAnon and the cult of personality around Donald Trump, are grounded in religious extremism.
Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism, is not in any way on the decline. There's a lot that we have to be worried about.
They believe that God has given them dominion. And that dominion means they have dominion over everybody who doesn't believe in God, who doesn't think like they do, and that God created this nation for them and specifically for white men. And so I think that's a very important part of what we're seeing here with Christian nationalism. It's also about race.
This movement was the foundation for January 6th. They were the moving elements that made January 6th and the insurrection happen.
So this plan has already been put into action. And I only think it's a matter of time before Christianity becomes de facto outlawed in America. Again, I don't know if it'll ever become explicitly outlawed, but it will be de facto outlawed if Democrats have their way. And what does this mean exactly? Well, this means that if you go to church, if you declare yourself a Christian in any way, well, this will indicate, or at least they will pretend that this indicates, that you are a potential domestic terror threat, and then that will give the FBI the right to spy on you. It'll give them the right to monitor your phone, to monitor your text messages, to monitor your browser history. They could even monitor your security footage. Say you have a baby monitor in your home, the FBI, the NSA, they could hack into that and they could just watch you. Total surveillance state. And then if by chance there are some people in the FBI or the NSA that are, I don't know, a little corrupt. I know that's a ridiculous idea, but let's pretend that that's a possibility. If not everyone in these agencies are, let's say, good people, right? Then it's a possibility that some of these more nefarious agents, they might try to leverage any kind of scandalous information that they might gather on you. They might try to leverage you with that information. Now, I have discussed the efforts of the Soviets to try to break down the American system of government before in my videos, but it has been a little while, so I think it's worth reviewing. The Soviets used to have a program called Comintern. This stood for Communist International. The purpose of this organization was very specifically to spread communism throughout the world, thereby giving the Soviets more power. The standard method for flipping a country to communism was to create chaos in the country by creating divisions between the lower classes and the upper class. They would create resentment among the poor, and they would create an overwhelming belief that if they could just redistribute the wealth of the rich, that all of the members of society would be better off. This is what happened even fairly recently in Venezuela. However, in the 1920s, the Comintern agency came to the realization that the United States would never be able to be converted using this method. And that is because in the United States, we have always had a robust middle class. There were not very many rich people, and there were relatively few poor people. And most Americans lived in the middle class, and they had a very high quality of life compared to almost everyone else in the world. And in fact, middle-class Americans live better than most rich people throughout the history of the world. And how do you convince those people that their lives are terrible? It's a difficult thing to do. So instead, the communists decided that the best way to create division in America was to create division along racial lines. They realized that there was a racial tension between black Americans and white Americans, and they realized that many white Americans actually supported these black Americans, and so they decided that they would amplify any kind of injustice against black Americans that they thought that they could exploit. And this, as we have seen, has worked very well. Leftists have been working very hard for decades to convince black Americans that anything bad that happens in their lives is due to the evil white man, and in particular, the straight white male Republican. And here's the thing. A lot of these strategies to divide America based on race, to create a culture of immorality, to eradicate Christianity from the culture, a lot of these strategies have been in place for 100 years. The communists, they understood that regime change was not always something that could happen overnight. They understood that sometimes you need a strategy that would be a 20-year strategy, or a 50-year strategy, or a 100-year strategy. And even though the Soviet Union was toppled by Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, and I know people are going to jump in the comment section and say that's not true, I don't care. Even though Ronald Reagan single-handedly destroyed Soviet communism in the 1980s, their long-term efforts are still ongoing today. They may not be advanced by the agents of the Soviet Union anymore. The baton has been passed to the selfish degenerates in the deep state that would, if they could, take full control over the United States of America ad infinitum.
Ideological subversion is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid of society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom When a military boot crashes his, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in a state of war. Undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system, however ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system, or the world communist conspiracy. Whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Now, this video went viral a couple of years back, but I think sometimes we forget that all this stuff is still in place. And so I think it's important to play this video at least once a year to remind ourselves that we are still in this war. We are still fighting against the legacy of the Soviet Union trying to destroy America. And it's no longer the Russians who are fighting against us. As I said, the baton has now been passed to leftists right here in America. And their chief champion today is the Biden administration. The Biden administration has advanced the historical aims of the Soviet Union faster and more significantly than anyone else in American history. And now they want to eradicate Christianity in America and use our religion as a cudgel against us. Christianity has already been extracted from certain subsets of the population. Many Americans have abandoned Christianity, or if they still consider themselves Christians, many have abandoned Christian morality. Beyond this, there is a smaller, more vocal subset of the population that is outright hostile to Christianity. The left has exploited this extremely well. The left understands that human beings need something to believe in. We are hardwired to want to be part of something greater than ourselves. Personally, I believe that this is because there is something greater than ourselves. I'm sure an atheist could come up with a dozen reasons why human beings evolved to perceive that there is a God or to want to have some great purpose in their lives. But I believe that the reason that we require some purpose in our lives, the reason that we perceive something greater than ourselves in this existence, is that there is a God. Contrary to conventional belief, I think that God makes his existence very obvious, plainly knowable. Historically, the question was never, is there a God, but rather, which God is the true God? people had an understanding that there was something greater than themselves, but different cultures had different explanations for what that greater thing was. Now, whether you believe in God or whether you are religious or whether you are moral or immoral, this is actually irrelevant to the question of whether or not the Democrat Party, leftists in America, and the deep state are trying to exploit the human desire to be part of something bigger than themselves and to strip away all duty that we have to God and to apply that duty, to apply that reverence, to apply that total allegiance to the state. These leftists want to be your God. So I don't think it's enough that we are aware of what's going on. I don't think it's enough that we fight against what's going on by denying the left what they want. It's not enough that we stop them from characterizing Christians as dangerous. It's not enough that we stop them from making Christianity de facto illegal in America. It's certainly not enough just to stop them from imprisoning Americans just for practicing Christianity, which is, I think, eventually what they will do. Now, we have to make America a Christian nation once again. And this is, of course, not the Christian nationalism that the left keeps screaming about. I'm not suggesting that we arrest people for not being Christian. But again, the left always accuses us of exactly what they're planning to do themselves, which, if you didn't believe anything that I said up until this point, think about the fact that they are accusing Christians of wanting to lock people up who are not Christian. If that rule stands, that the left always accuses us of that which they plan to do themselves, that in itself is evidence that what I'm saying is true. So we have to make America a Christian nation again. We have to convince people that being a Christian can only benefit your life. We live in a world today in which everyone is isolated. Now, if you have a family, that's great. If you've got a family, you're probably a much more healthy, stable person than the average American. But for a lot of people today, they live in their apartment or their home isolated from just about everybody else in the world. They watch TV or they watch YouTube videos or they're flipping through Instagram or TikTok. They're interacting with people through Twitter, but people aren't really engaging with other people socially in large groups much at all anymore. This does happen in school. Students have to interact socially. In universities, students have to interact socially. Also, I think this is why people prefer to work for major corporations, because then they get that office environment. You get that social interaction. If you've got a very successful company, they'll usually pay for company activities in which you'll be forced to socialize in a broader way with people outside your immediate office sometimes. So in that way, I understand the allure of the corporate job in America. So look, we do still have some socializing that goes on within our culture, which I think is a good thing. However, the loss of the church as a fundamental social gathering place in America, I think is a great tragedy. Now, I'm not sure how we convince Americans that going to church is going to make their lives better, but I do think that we have to do something to get America back on track. We need to get Americans reading the Bible again. We need to get Americans praying again. We need to get Americans going back to church again. Now, I know that there are certain parts of America in which this is still common. Perhaps you live in one of those places in America. And to you, I say you are a very lucky person. My family back in Oregon, they all go to church still. And I think, they have a pretty good relationship with a lot of the people they go to church with. But living in LA, I found it very difficult to find a church that I liked. So I actually haven't gone to church regularly in years. When I was a kid, going to church was compulsory for just about everyone. I once saw a comedian make a joke about a husband pretending that he was sick so that he could stay home from church and watch football, whilst the rest of the family took the station wagon and attended the Sunday service. 30 years ago, the thought of skipping church for something as trivial as watching football would have seemed shocking to most people. And 30 years ago, everyone would have related to that joke. But today, nobody would find that joke shocking at all. And I think we're lucky if just a small fraction of the country would even relate to that joke. I think in America, there is a new cult. Let's call it a subset of the woke cult. And that is the cult of self-indulgence. Now, men are heavily represented in this cult, don't get me wrong, but I think this is primarily a cult of women. And, you can usually spot it because they use the expression, taking care of yourself or something along those lines. There's this idea with American women today that they have to take care of themselves all the time, take time for themselves. They come first. And look, no, I do understand that there are a lot of moms out there, a lot of housewives that never put themselves first. And when these women finally do get to do something for themselves, when they finally put themselves first for once, when they finally take a moment for just, a little self-indulgence, we tend to celebrate it because it's a beautiful thing. It's somebody who probably deserves a lot more attention. It's probably somebody who has deserved a break a long time ago. And they're finally getting that break now. They're finally getting that little moment of freedom, that little moment of luxury. But what I've seen in recent years is that people see TV shows in which a woman like this finally gets her moment to herself, finally gets to feel special, finally gets to take a break from putting everyone else first, and they finally put themselves first for the first time in their lives. And I see a huge swath of the female population then think, yeah, I should come first. I should be a little self-indulgent. I shouldn't make everything about everyone else. I should make everything about me for once. But of course, the problem with this phenomenon is that most of these women have never put anyone else first. They've always put themselves first. And they're simply using this other woman's experience as an excuse to continue putting themselves first in their own lives and to feel absolutely zero obligation to anyone else, including their husband, including their children. Our society has engendered a feeling of absolution from guilt for women in America neglecting their families and their friends. Because, women naturally feel an obligation to others. This is a feminine trait. And feminists have worked very hard to try to eradicate these feelings of guilt in women. They have brainwashed women into feeling that they have no obligation to anyone but themselves. And so we have become a nation of narcissists. And the feminization of men has exacerbated this trend because some of these women are moms to young boys, and they fill the boys' heads with this sense of entitlement. And now you've got, I would say, a couple of generations at least of kids that have grown up as total narcissists. Christianity, and especially the church, instills in a person a sense of humility. Certainly, you will walk around the world with a great sense of confidence in the knowledge that you have some connection to God. But with that confidence comes an understanding that you are not the center of the universe. God is the center of the universe. And although you should not bow down to other men, God instructs us that we should treat others as we would want to be treated. Christianity teaches us not just to love our neighbors, but to love our enemies. Christianity teaches us to be humble, kind, and generous. It teaches us to respect our fellow man. If we lived in a society where everyone was humble and kind and generous and respected their fellow man, we would unquestioningly live in the greatest nation on earth. And America was like that once. We need to strive to make America that way once again. And at the end of the day, this is what we mean